I was staring at my computer screen, mentally calculating how many more hours of overtime I'd need to finish the quarterly report, when I felt something brush against my ankle. At first, I thought it was just my imagination playing tricks on me after 10 straight hours of work. But then I felt it again, a deliberate, gentle pressure against my shoe. My heart jumped as I slowly rolled my chair back and peered under the desk. What I saw made my breath catch in my throat. A small boy no older than 7 was curled up in the shadows beneath my workspace. His knees were pulled tight to his chest and his wide eyes glistened with unshed tears that threatened to spill down his flushed cheeks. "Please don't tell anyone I'm here," he whispered, his tiny fingers clutching the edge of my pant leg with surprising strength. His voice trembled with fear, and I could see his whole body shaking. I froze completely, my mind struggling to process what was happening. How did a child end up in our office building? Why was he hiding? And more importantly, why did he look so terrified? "Hey there," I started gently, trying to keep my voice calm and reassuring. "What are you doing The conference room doors burst open before I could finish my sentence, and my entire body went rigid. Amos Howard, the CEO of our company, strode out with the kind of presence that made everyone in the vicinity straighten their posture. He was tall, probably 6'3", with a jawline that could cut glass and a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. His expression was set in that perpetual mask of controlled authority that made even senior executives nervous. I had never spoken directly to him before. He existed in a completely different stratosphere from junior analysts like me. We were separated by at least 5 organizational levels, countless zeros in salary difference, and what felt like an unbridgeable social chasm. But today, his steel-gray eyes were scanning the office floor with unusual intensity, and then they landed directly on me. He began walking toward my desk with measured, purposeful steps that made my pulse race uncontrollably. Was he looking for the child? Had someone already reported seeing a boy in the building? My palms started sweating as he came closer, each footfall echoing in my ears like a countdown. "Excuse me," his voice was deep and controlled, but there was an underlying current of something I'd never heard from him before. Worry, perhaps even desperation. "Have you noticed a child wandering around this floor?" Before I could even attempt to formulate a response, I felt the boy's grip on my ankle tighten painfully. I glanced down for just a fraction of a second and saw his pleading expression, those desperate eyes begging me not to reveal his hiding spot. There was something in that look that bypassed all my rational thoughts about corporate hierarchy and professional consequences. "No, sir," I heard myself say, somehow managing to keep my voice steady despite the lie. "I haven't seen anyone. Just been focused on these reports all evening." Amos studied my face with an intensity that made me feel like he could see straight through my skull and read every thought I'd ever had. Those penetrating gray eyes seemed to catalog every micro-expression, every nervous twitch, every bead of sweat forming on my forehead. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity, and I forced myself to maintain eye contact even though every instinct screamed at me to look away. Finally, after what must have been only seconds but felt like hours, he gave a slight nod. "If you do see him, please notify security immediately. It's important." "Of course, sir," I managed to reply and watched as he turned and walked toward the elevators, his phone already pressed to his ear. The moment the elevator doors closed behind him, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My hands were trembling as I ducked my head back under the desk. "Okay, kiddo," I whispered, trying to sound gentle but firm. "You need to tell me what's going on. That man who was just here, he's looking for you, isn't he?" He seemed really worried. The boy's lower lip trembled, and fresh tears started rolling down his cheeks. "He's my dad, but I just make everything harder for him. I heard him on the phone yesterday saying how exhausting it is to juggle everything. He meant me. I'm the thing that's too much trouble." My chest tightened painfully at his words. This tiny human being, probably in 2nd or 3rd grade, was carrying around guilt and self-blame that no child should ever feel. I could hear the genuine anguish in his voice, the belief that he was somehow a burden. "Listen to me carefully," I said, shifting to sit cross-legged on the floor so I could look at him properly. "Adults say things when they're stressed that don't mean what kids think they mean. Your dad isn't tired of you. He's probably tired because he works so hard to give you a good life. There's a huge difference. He looked at me with skeptical, red-rimmed eyes. But he's always busy, always in meetings or on calls. Sometimes I think he forgets I'm even there. If I tell him where I am now, he'll just go back to work and forget about me again. The raw pain in those words hit me harder than I expected. This wasn't just a child acting out or playing a prank. This was a lonely kid desperately trying to get his father's attention in the only way he knew how. "What's your name?" I asked softly. "John," he sniffled, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. "Okay, John, here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna walk with you to find your dad. And I promise, I absolutely promise, that I'll make sure he understands how you're feeling. You won't have to do this alone. Deal?" John studied my face for a long moment, probably trying to determine if he could trust this random stranger who'd just lied to his father for him. Then slowly he nodded and extended his small hand toward me. I took it carefully, noting how small and fragile it felt in my palm, and helped him crawl out from under the desk. We walked together through the now mostly empty office, past abandoned cubicles and darkened conference rooms, toward the executive floor. As we rounded the corner to the elevator bank, I nearly collided with someone. Amos Howard stood there like a statue, arms crossed over his chest, his expression unreadable, but his eyes, those piercing gray eyes, were fixed intently on me, and this time there was something different in them. Not just relief at finding his son, but something more complex. Curiosity, maybe, or suspicion. "Thank you for bringing him to me," he said quietly, but his gaze never left my face. He was studying me again, but this time it felt different. More personal. Somehow. "It was nothing, Mr. Howard. I just—" "John," Amos interrupted, his voice gentle but carrying an unmistakable note of parental authority as he addressed his son. "You know you can't run away like that. This building isn't safe for children to wander alone." John dropped his gaze to the floor, guilt written across his small features. But then, in a moment that surprised both of us, he gripped my hand tighter and looked up at his father with sudden determination. "I want this man to stay with me," John announced, his voice small but firm. "He's nice, he listened to me." The words hung in the air between us, and I felt Amos's gaze shift from his son to me with new intensity. There was calculation there now, and something else I couldn't quite identify, a question forming behind those analytical eyes. "What's your name?" he asked, and though the question was simple, the way he asked it felt weighted with significance. "Tyler Carter, sir," I replied, trying desperately to maintain some semblance of professionalism despite the surreal nature of this entire situation. Amos nodded slowly, but he continued to stare at me with that unreadable expression. I could practically see the wheels turning in his mind, processing and analyzing, and somewhere in the back of those sharp, intelligent eyes, I sensed a question taking shape, one that neither of us could answer yet. Had his son chosen me for a reason? Was this random chance or something else entirely? The next morning arrived with the kind of bright sunshine that felt almost offensive given my state of exhausted confusion. I had barely slept, my mind replaying the strange encounter with John and his father on an endless loop. Every time I'd closed my eyes, I saw those pleading looks from the child and that penetrating stare from Amos Howard. I was halfway through my third cup of coffee, trying to focus on a spreadsheet that kept blurring before my eyes, when my phone vibrated sharply against my desk. The notification made my stomach drop. "Mr. Howard requests your presence in his office. Please come immediately." My coffee went cold in my hand as I stared at the message. A direct summons from the CEO could only mean one of two things. Either I was about to be fired for lying to him yesterday, or something even more complicated was about to happen. Neither option seemed particularly appealing. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt like ascending toward my own execution. I adjusted my tie 3 times, checked my reflection in the polished steel doors, and tried to rehearse what I might say if he confronted me about my dishonesty. By the time I reached his office suite, my shirt collar felt too tight, and my hands were clammy. His assistant, a sharply dressed woman with reading glasses perched on her nose, barely glanced up as she gestured toward the imposing double doors. "Go right in. He's expecting you." I pushed open the doors and stepped into an office that was more intimidating than I'd imagined. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city below. The furniture was all sleek lines and expensive materials. Leather, dark wood, and brushed steel. Everything screamed power and success. But what caught me completely off guard was the sight of John sitting on the plush carpet near his father's massive desk, surrounded by toy cars that he was arranging into an elaborate traffic pattern. When he saw me, his entire face transformed with joy. "Tyler," he exclaimed, scrambling to his feet. "You came back." Amos was seated behind his desk, fingers steepled in front of him, watching this interaction with keen interest. Today he wore a navy suit that probably cost more than my car, and his expression was carefully neutral, the face of a man who'd perfected the art of revealing nothing. "Mr. Carter," he said, his voice professionally cordial, "please sit down. We have some things to discuss." I lowered myself into the chair across from him, feeling like I was about to negotiate a hostage situation rather than have a conversation with my boss's boss's boss. "I'll be direct, because I value both our time," Amos began, leaning back slightly in his leather chair. "What happened yesterday was not the first time John has tried to run away or hide from his responsibilities. He's been struggling since his mother passed away 2 years ago, and finding connections with people has become increasingly difficult for him." I stayed quiet, sensing that he needed to say this without interruption. His jaw tightened slightly when he mentioned his late wife, the first crack I'd seen in his composed exterior. "However," he continued, his eyes finding mine with laser focus, "in the 5 minutes you spent with my son yesterday, you managed to earn more of his trust than 3 professional therapists have earned in 6 months. He talked about you all night, about how you didn't treat him like he was broken or problematic, about how you just listen." I shifted uncomfortably in my seat, unsure where this was heading or what response he expected from me. "I need someone for John," Amos said, and there was something almost vulnerable in the way he said it, like the admission cost him something. "Not a therapist he'll resist, not a nanny he'll resent. Someone genuine who can be a positive presence in his life during this difficult time." My mouth went dry as I began to understand what he was suggesting. "Mr. Howard, I'm not qualified for childcare. I'm just an analyst who happened to—" "That's precisely why you're qualified," he cut me off. But not unkindly. "You're not approaching him with clinical techniques or professional distance. You treated him like a real person with real feelings. That's what he needs. That's what I need for him." He paused, studying my reaction carefully before continuing. "I'm prepared to offer you a significant supplemental income to spend time with John weekends. Some evenings when my schedule is particularly demanding. Nothing inappropriate or excessive. Just being someone he can talk to. Someone who can help him feel less alone." The offer was so unexpected, so far outside the realm of normal corporate interactions, that I struggled to process it. This was a man who commanded billion-dollar deals, who made decisions that affected thousands of employees. And he was asking me, a junior analyst he'd never spoken to before yesterday, to help with his son. "I understand this is unusual," Amos added, and I detected something in his voice that surprised me. Uncertainty, maybe even fear that I'd refuse. "And I want to be clear that your regular job performance and standing in the company won't be affected regardless of your answer. This is entirely separate. I'm asking you as a father, not as your employer." Before I could formulate any kind of response, John appeared at my elbow, having abandoned his cars. He looked up at me with those same hopeful eyes from yesterday. "Please, Tyler," he said quietly. "Dad tries really hard, but he has to work a lot, and I get scared sometimes when I'm alone. You made me feel safe yesterday, like maybe I wasn't such a problem after all." The simple honesty of his words shattered whatever professional reservations I'd been constructing. Here was a child who'd lost his mother, who felt like a burden to his only remaining parent, who was drowning in loneliness despite living in a penthouse that probably had more square footage than my entire apartment building. "Okay," I heard myself say before my rational brain could interfere. "I'll do it. I can't promise I'll be great at it, but I'll try my best." John's smile was brilliant and uncomplicated, the kind of pure joy that only children can produce. He threw his arms around my waist in an impulsive hug that caught me completely off guard. When I looked up at Amos, expecting to see professional relief or satisfaction at a successful negotiation, I instead caught something else flickering across his face. It was gone almost immediately, replaced by his usual controlled expression, but I'd seen it, a flash of something raw and complicated that looked almost like longing. "Thank you, Tyler," he said, and his voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. "I think this might be exactly what we both need." As I left his office with plans to visit their home that coming Saturday, I couldn't shake the strange feeling that I'd just agreed to something far more significant than a simple childcare arrangement. The way Amos had looked at me in that brief, unguarded moment suggested that perhaps John wasn't the only Howard who was searching for connection. Saturday afternoon found me standing outside a residential tower that made my apartment complex look like a storage unit facility. The building's lobby featured actual marble columns, a fountain with what looked like real gold fixtures, and a doorman whose uniform was more formal than anything in my closet. I suddenly felt deeply inadequate in my casual jeans and button-down shirt. The elevator to the penthouse required a keycard, which made me feel like I was entering some kind of exclusive club I hadn't earned membership to. When the doors finally opened directly into the Howard residence, I was immediately struck by two contradictory impressions. The space was absolutely stunning, and it felt completely empty of life. John came running before I'd even fully stepped inside, his face breaking into that uninhibited grin that seemed to be reserved just for me. "You actually came," he shouted, grabbing both my hands and pulling me forward with surprising strength for such a small person. "I wasn't sure you'd really show up." "Of course I came," I told him, squeezing his hands gently. "I promised, didn't I?" Amos emerged from what looked like a home office, and I almost didn't recognize him at first. Gone was the severe business suit, replaced by dark jeans and a simple gray Henley that made him look younger and somehow more human. His hair was slightly disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it, and there was a coffee stain on his sleeve that he either hadn't noticed or didn't care about. "Tyler," he greeted me with a nod. "Thanks for coming." John's been counting down the hours since breakfast. The penthouse was exactly what you'd expect from a successful CEO. All clean lines, expensive furniture and artwork that probably cost more than most people's houses. But it lacked the warmth that makes a space feel like a home. There were no family photos on display, no clutter, no signs of daily life being lived here. It felt more like a luxury hotel suite than a place where a child was growing up. John dragged me toward his bedroom, which was the only room that showed any real personality. It was filled with toys, books, and posters of superheroes, though I noticed many of the toys still had tags on them or sat untouched on their shelves. Gifts given but rarely played with. "Can we build something with these blocks?" John asked, already dumping out a container of colorful building pieces onto the floor. "I started a castle last week, but I couldn't figure out how to make the towers stay up." We spent the next 2 hours completely absorbed in construction projects. John talked nonstop once he got comfortable, telling me about his school, his favorite teacher, Mrs. Patterson, the kid in his class who could burp the alphabet, and how much he missed his mom's chocolate chip cookies. He mentioned his mother naturally, without the awkward sadness that adults usually brought to the topic, and I followed his lead, acknowledging her memory without dwelling in sorrow. At one point I needed to use the bathroom and found myself walking back through the main living area. Amos was there, sitting on the couch with his laptop open, but he wasn't looking at the screen. He was staring out the window at the city skyline, his expression distant and troubled. "He's really happy right now," I said quietly, not wanting to startle him. "John, I mean. He's showing me everything in his room and talking about school." Amos turned to look at me, and for a moment his professional mask was completely gone. He looked tired. Not just physically exhausted, but emotionally drained in a way that sleep couldn't fix. "I used to know how to make him happy," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Before Sarah died, I knew exactly what to say, what to do. Now I feel like I'm failing him every single day." The vulnerability in his admission caught me off guard. This was the man who commanded boardrooms and closed million-dollar deals without breaking a sweat. And here he was confessing his deepest fears to someone he barely knew. "You're not failing him," I said, surprising myself with my own boldness. "You're grieving too and trying to hold everything together at the same time. That's not failing, that's surviving. But John doesn't need you to be perfect. He just needs you to be present." Amos studied me with those intense gray eyes, and I saw something shift in his expression. Surprise. Maybe that I'd spoken so directly, or perhaps it was recognition, the acknowledgement that I'd touched on something true that he'd been avoiding. "You speak with a lot of certainty for someone so young," he observed, but there was no criticism in his tone. If anything, he sounded almost impressed. "I'm not that young," I defended, though at 26 I was probably a decade younger than him. "And I'm just saying what I see. You're so focused on providing for him and him that you've forgotten he also needs to just spend time with you. Not scheduled quality time or planned activities. Just being together." Before Amos could respond, John came bounding back into the room, completely oblivious to the heavy conversation he'd interrupted. "Tyler, come see what I found. It's my mom's old recipe book, and I think we could make cookies together. Dad, do we have chocolate chips?" Amos's expression softened completely as he looked at his son, and I saw genuine love there, the kind that ached because it felt insufficient against the weight of loss and single parenthood. "I think we do," he said. "Want to check the pantry together?" What followed was beautifully chaotic. None of us were particularly skilled bakers, and the kitchen quickly became a disaster zone of flour clouds and chocolate chips scattered across the counter. But John was laughing, genuinely freely laughing, and even Amos cracked a real smile when John accidentally got cookie dough in his hair. As we pulled the first tray of misshapen but edible cookies from the oven, John looked between his father and me with pure contentment on his face. "This is the most fun I've had in forever," he announced, completely unaware of how much those simple words meant. Amos's eyes met mine over John's head, and in that moment something passed between us, an understanding perhaps, or an acknowledgement of something neither of us was ready to name. He mouthed "thank you" silently, and I nodded in response. Later, as I was preparing to leave, Amos walked me to the elevator. John had fallen asleep on the couch, exhausted from the afternoon's activities, leaving us alone in the quiet hallway. "I meant what I said earlier," Amos told me, his voice low. "You're good for him, better than I could have hoped." "He's a great kid," I replied. "He just needs to know he matters more than business meetings and work deadlines." Amos flinched slightly at that, but he didn't disagree. Instead, he did something unexpected. He reached out and briefly touched my shoulder, his hand warm through my shirt. "Same time next week?" he asked, but there was something in his eyes that made the question feel like it meant more than just scheduling. "Yeah," I agreed, my heart beating slightly faster for reasons I didn't want to examine. "Same time next week." As the elevator descended, I realized that what had started as a favor for a lonely child was evolving into something far more complex. I was being drawn into the Howard family's orbit, and I wasn't entirely sure whether that was a good thing or a dangerous complication waiting to happen. The following Wednesday evening, I received a text message that made me stare at my phone in confusion. It was from Amos Howard, a number I'd saved but never expected to receive personal messages from. "Would you be available for dinner at the penthouse tonight? John has been asking about you. I'm attempting to cook. Fair warning, my culinary skills are questionable at best." The casual tone was so unlike the formal CEO I'd encountered in boardrooms and elevators that I had to read it twice to make sure I hadn't misunderstood. Before I could overthink it, I texted back my confirmation and spent the next hour second-guessing my decision to wear jeans instead of something more appropriate. When I arrived at the penthouse, Amos himself answered the door. He was wearing an apron over his clothes, a sight so unexpected that I actually laughed before I could stop myself. The apron had a faded print of cartoon vegetables on it, clearly something that had belonged to his late wife based on its feminine style. "Go ahead and laugh," he said, but there was amusement in his eyes, rather than offense. "John insisted I wear it. Apparently all proper cooks need aprons." "I wasn't laughing at you," I said quickly, though we both knew that was exactly what I'd been doing. "It's just different from the three-piece suits." "Tyler's here." John's excited voice came from somewhere deeper in the apartment, followed by the sound of small feet running toward us. He appeared moments later, his face flushed with excitement. "We're making spaghetti. Real Italian spaghetti. Well, Dad says it's probably not real Italian, but it smells really good." The dining table had been set with care. Nice plates, folded napkins, even a small vase with fresh flowers. It was clear that effort had gone into making this feel special, and something about that thoughtfulness made my chest feel tight. Dinner was actually quite good, Though Amos deflected every compliment I tried to give him about the food, John dominated the conversation, telling elaborate stories about his day at school, a science project involving volcanoes, and his friend Marcus, who apparently could wiggle his ears without using his hands. Amos listened with genuine attention, occasionally asking questions or laughing at John's more dramatic storytelling flourishes. It was such a normal domestic scene that I almost forgot about the luxury penthouse surrounding us, the billion-dollar company Amos ran, and the fact that I was technically an employee sharing dinner with my ultimate boss. For those moments, we were just three people enjoying a meal together. After dinner, John's energy finally crashed. He'd been running on excitement all evening, but now his eyes were drooping as he sat on the couch. Amos noticed immediately, scooping him up with practiced ease. "Bedtime for you," he said gently, and John was too tired to protest. "Say goodnight to Tyler. Don't leave before I fall asleep," John mumbled against his father's shoulder. "Promise?" "I promise," I told him, watching as Amos carried him toward the bedroom. I was clearing the dinner plates when Amos returned, looking more relaxed than I'd ever seen him. He'd removed the apron and rolled up his sleeves, and there was a softness to his expression that made him seem approachable in a way the CEO version of himself never did. "You don't have to clean up," he said, moving to help anyway. "You're a guest." "I don't mind. Besides, you cooked. Fair is fair." We worked in comfortable silence for a few minutes, falling into an easy rhythm of washing and drying dishes. It felt strangely intimate, this quiet domestic task, more personal somehow than any conversation we'd had in his office. "Can I ask you something?" Amos said suddenly, his voice careful. "And I want you to be honest, even if you think it's not what I want to hear." I set down the dish I'd been drying and turned to face him. "Of course. Do you think I'm doing right by him? By John?" He wasn't looking at me, focusing instead on the soapy water in the sink. "Not as a provider, I know I can give him material things. But as a father, do you think he's going to be okay?" The vulnerability in his voice caught me off guard. This was a man who commanded respect through confidence and control. And here he was asking for reassurance like any uncertain parent. "He's going to be more than okay," I said firmly. "You love him. That's obvious in everything you do. And yes, you work long hours. But you're trying. That's more than a lot of kids get." Amos finally looked at me, and there was something searching in his gaze. "You make it look so easy. Being around him, talking to him. How do you do that?" "I just treat him like a person," I said with a shrug. "Kids aren't a different species. They're just small humans who haven't learned to hide what they're feeling yet." He smiled at that, a real genuine smile that transformed his entire face. That's probably the most honest description of children I've ever heard. We finished the dishes and moved to the living room, where Amos poured himself a small glass of wine from an expensive-looking bottle. He offered me one, but I declined, suddenly aware of how alone we were, how quiet the apartment had become with John asleep. "Tyler," he began, then paused as if reconsidering his words. "I want to thank you, not just for helping with John, but for being here, for making this place feel less empty." There was something in the way he said it, a loneliness that went deeper than just missing his late wife. It was the isolation of someone who'd been strong for so long that he'd forgotten how to let anyone see his weaknesses. "You don't have to thank me," I said quietly. "I like being here, with both of you." Our eyes met, and for a moment the air between us felt charged with something unspoken. Amos took a step closer, and I found myself frozen, unsure if I wanted him to close the distance or maintain it. Then his hand rose slowly, hovering near my shoulder before gently making contact. The touch was brief, almost hesitant, but it sent electricity racing through my nervous system. His palm was warm through my shirt, and his thumb brushed once against my collarbone before he pulled away. "I should let you go," he said, his voice slightly rough. "It's getting late." I nodded, not trusting my voice, and moved toward the door on unsteady legs. As I waited for the elevator, I could feel his eyes on me, but when I glanced back, he'd already stepped inside and closed the door. The ride down felt surreal. My heart was racing, my thoughts scattered. That brief touch had lasted maybe 3 seconds, but it had shifted something fundamental between us. This wasn't just about John anymore. Something else was developing, something complicated and potentially dangerous, and I had no idea how to navigate it. As I walked to my car, I realized I was in trouble. The kind of trouble that started with innocent touches and ended with impossible situations. But even knowing that, I couldn't bring myself to regret accepting the dinner invitation. Friday nights at the office were usually quiet, with most employees having fled by 6 o'clock to start their weekends. I'd stayed late to finish a budget analysis that was due Monday, finding the silence helpful for concentration. It was nearly 9 when I heard the executive elevator chime. I looked up, surprised to see Amos Howard emerging. He was still in his work clothes but looked worn down in a way I'd never seen. Tie loosened, jacket draped over his arm, hair slightly disheveled from what I assumed had been a long day of running his hands through it. His eyes found me immediately, and he paused mid-stride, seeming equally surprised to find anyone still here. "Working late again?" he asked, walking toward my desk with that measured pace that made every movement look deliberate. "Just finishing up some projections," I replied, suddenly self-conscious about the fact that I'd probably looked as exhausted as I felt. Wanted to get ahead before the weekend. He stopped at the edge of my workspace, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something expensive and woodsy. "You work too hard for someone at your level. The company won't collapse if you leave at 5 occasionally," says the man who's here at 9 on a Friday night, I countered before I could think better of challenging him. The ghost of a smile crossed his face. Touché. Though in my defense, I had a board meeting that ran long. "What's your excuse? Perfectionism? Fear of failure? Take your pick." He studied me for a long moment, and I watched something shift in his expression from professional courtesy to something more personal, more intense. "Tyler, I need to talk to you about something," he said, his voice dropping lower. "About John. About this arrangement we have." My stomach tightened. This was it. He was going to end our agreement. I'd known it was too good to be true. Too strange to last. "Is something wrong?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Did I do something?" "No," he interrupted quickly. "Nothing like that. It's just, John talks about you constantly. You're becoming incredibly important to him, and I'm worried about what happens when this inevitably ends." "When it ends?" The words stung more than they should have. "I told you I wasn't going anywhere." "People always say that," Amos said, and there was old pain in his voice. "But circumstances change. You might get a better job offer, meet someone, move away. And when that happens, John will be devastated." I stood up, needing to be at eye level with him for this conversation. "Is this really about John? Or are you looking for an excuse to push me away before you get too attached?" The words were out before I could stop them, too honest and too direct. Amos's eyes widened slightly, and I saw that I'd hit close to home. "That's not," he started, then stopped. "I don't know, maybe. Probably." The admission hung between us, raw and vulnerable. I could see him struggling with it, this man who'd built an empire on confidence and control, now admitting he was afraid. "Amos," I said, using his first name deliberately, "I'm not going to abandon John. Or you. I gave my word and I meant it." "Why?" The question came out almost desperate. "Why would you commit to this? To us? You barely know us." "Because John deserves someone who shows up. Because you deserve not to do this alone. Because," I trailed off, unsure how to finish that sentence without saying too much. "Because what?" he pressed, taking a step closer. We were nearly touching now, close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in his gray eyes. "Because being with you both makes me feel like I matter," I admitted quietly. "Like I'm part of something real instead of just going through the motions of existing." Something cracked in Amos's carefully maintained composure. His hand came up slowly, giving me plenty of time to step back if I wanted to. Instead, I stood still as his fingers brushed along my jaw, the touch feather light and questioning. "You do matter," he whispered. "More than is probably wise. More than I should allow." My breath caught as his thumb traced along my cheekbone. The touch was gentle but sent shock waves through my entire system. This was crossing a line we'd both been carefully avoiding, and we both knew it. "Amos," I breathed, not sure if I was protesting or encouraging. "I know," he said. "This is wrong. You work for me. You're here for John. This complicates everything." But he didn't pull away. If anything, his hands settled more firmly against my face, cupping my jaw like I was something precious and fragile. "Then why are you still touching me?" I asked. my voice barely audible. Because I can't seem to stop myself around you. Because every time I see you with my son, every time you smile at me like I'm not just a title or a bank account, I forget why I need to maintain distance. The confession should have terrified me. Instead, it made something warm bloom in my chest, something that felt dangerous and inevitable. What do we do about this? I whispered. I don't know, he admitted. I haven't figured that out yet. We stood there for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. His hand on my face, our breathing synchronized, balanced on the edge of something that would change everything. Then his phone buzzed in his pocket, shattering the moment. He jerked back like he'd been burned, his hand dropping away as he fumbled for the device. It's John's nanny, he said, glancing at the screen. I should go, I said quickly. Take the call. He nodded, already moving toward the elevator, but paused with his hand on the button. Tyler, we need to talk about what just happened. About what this means. I know, I said, but not tonight. Go check on John. He looked like he wanted to argue, but the phone was still buzzing insistently. With one last conflicted glance in my direction, he disappeared into the elevator. I sank back into my chair, my legs suddenly unsteady. My face still tingled where he'd touched me and my heart was racing like I'd run a marathon. What had just happened? We'd crossed a line, that much was clear. But where did we go from here? How did you navigate feelings for your boss who was also the father of a child you'd grown to care about deeply? I packed up my things mechanically, my mind replaying every second of that interaction. The way he'd looked at me, the gentle brush of his thumb, the raw honesty in his voice. As I drove home through the empty streets, one thought kept repeating in my mind. Whatever was happening between Amos and me, it was no longer just about John. It never really had been. And that realization was both exhilarating and absolutely terrifying. Sunday morning arrived gray and overcast, matching my uncertain mood. I'd barely slept since Friday night, my thoughts consumed by that charged moment in the office and what it might mean for everything I'd built with Amos and John. When I arrived at the penthouse, the atmosphere felt different immediately. Heavier somehow, weighted with unspoken tension. John was playing quietly in his room. Unusual for him, and Amos stood at the massive windows overlooking the city, his posture rigid. Amos? I said carefully, setting down my keys. Is everything okay? He turned slowly, and what I saw in his face made my breath catch. There was no professional mask today, no careful control, just raw emotion, fear, longing, and something that looked like resignation. I need to be honest with you, he said without preamble. About why I really asked you to be part of John's life. About what I've been feeling since the day you lied to me to my son. My heart started pounding. What do you mean? You should sit down, he said, but I remained standing, needing to face whatever was coming head on. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I'd come to recognize as a sign of his internal struggle. When Sarah died, I shut down emotionally. I threw myself into work because it was easier than feeling the grief, than facing how lost I was. John suffered for that. I see that now, but what I didn't expect was that hiring you would force me to feel again. Amos, let me finish, he interrupted gently. Please? I've been rehearsing this all weekend, and if I stop now, I might not get it out. I nodded, giving him space to continue. The truth is, John choosing you wasn't random. Children have instincts about people. Yes, but I think part of why he connected with you so strongly was because he sensed what I was feeling, what I've been trying to deny for weeks now. What are you saying? I whispered, though part of me already knew. I'm saying that somewhere between watching you play with my son and listening to you call me out on my failings, I started developing feelings that go way beyond gratitude or professional respect. He took a step closer, his eyes never leaving mine. I'm saying that I look forward to your visits, not just because they make John happy, but because they make me feel alive for the first time in 2 years. The confession hung in the air between us, more intimate than any physical touch could have been. I struggled to process it, to understand what he was really asking. This puts us in an impossible position, I said, voicing the concern I knew we both shared. You're my employer. I work for your company. And John, I know, Amos said, and now he was close enough to touch, his presence overwhelming. Believe me, I've listed all the reasons this is a terrible idea. The power imbalance. The professional ethics. The potential harm to John if things go wrong. I've spent hours convincing myself to keep my distance. And yet here you are telling me anyway. Because hiding from it isn't working. Because pretending I don't feel this way is becoming harder than acknowledging it. Because, he paused, seeming to gather courage. Because I think you might feel something too, and I need to know if I'm completely misreading this situation. My mouth went dry. This was the moment where I could retreat, maintain the safety of professional boundaries, protect myself from the potential fallout. It would be the smart choice. The safe choice. You're not misreading it, I heard myself say instead. I've been trying not to feel anything beyond caring about John. But that's not what's happening. When I'm here with both of you, I feel like I've found something I didn't even know I was looking for. Amos's eyes closed briefly, and when they opened again, there was such relief and fear mixed together that it made my chest ache. So what do we do now? He asked. Because I refuse to put you in a position where you feel pressured or where your job is contingent on anything personal between us. What if I transferred to a different department? I suggested, the idea forming as I spoke, or even a different company. That would eliminate the direct power dynamic issue. You'd be willing to do that? If it means we can explore this honestly without that complication? Yes. He reached out slowly, telegraphing his intention, giving me every opportunity to pull back. When I didn't, his hand cupped my face with devastating gentleness, his thumb brushing across my cheekbone. Tyler, he said, my name a reverent whisper. If we do this, if we cross this line, there's no going back to how things were. Are you absolutely certain this is what you want? I'm terrified, I admitted. But yes, I'm certain. The space between us disappeared as he leaned down, but instead of kissing my lips, he pressed his forehead against mine. We stood there breathing the same air, existing in that threshold moment before everything changed irrevocably. Dad? Tyler? We sprang apart at John's voice, though not before he'd seen us standing close together. He stood in his doorway, looking between us with curious confusion. Hey buddy, Amos said, his voice remarkably steady considering what had just almost happened. Did you finish your drawing? Yeah, but are you guys okay? You look weird. I couldn't help but laugh at his blunt assessment. We're good, John. Just having a serious grown-up conversation. About me? Sort of, Amos said, moving to sit on the couch and patting the space beside him. John immediately climbed up, and I followed, sitting on John's other side. Tyler and I were talking about how much we both care about you, and about how much we like spending time together, all three of us. John's face lit up. Really? So Tyler's gonna keep coming over? Forever? As long as you want me to, I promised. Meeting Amos's eyes over John's head. And you and Dad are going to be friends? Good friends? There was something knowing in the way John asked it, like maybe he understood more than we gave him credit for. Amos and I exchanged a look, and in that moment, I saw all the possibility and complexity and hope reflected back at me. Yeah, Amos said softly, wrapping an arm around his son while his eyes stayed locked on mine. Tyler and I are going to be very good friends. John seemed satisfied with this answer, immediately launching into plans for what we should do that afternoon. But as he chattered away, Amos reached across and briefly squeezed my hand, a promise and a beginning all at once. Whatever happened next would be complicated. There would be conversations about boundaries and ethics, about how to navigate this unusual situation we'd created. But looking at John's happy face and feeling the warmth of Amos's hand in mine, I knew I'd made the right choice. Some things were worth the risk. Some people were worth fighting for. And this small, unexpected family we were building together was absolutely one of them.